Welcome to Leadership Under the Microscope, a production of JR Global. Our current series is Leading in Crisis and focuses on how leaders react to and perform in time of turmoil. The emphasis today is on the arts and education sector. Here is your host, J.R. Klein.
A recent report described the devastating impact that the pandemic has had on New York City's arts and entertainment sector. Many venues, including Broadway theaters, have remained shuttered for nearly a year. The pandemic has had a profound effect on arts worldwide. Not only the theaters on Broadway, but across the country and around the world went suddenly dark. All art venues, including concerts from symphonies to contemporary music festivals, were canceled. Museums and galleries were closed. Libraries and movie theaters were shuttered. This has had a devastating effect on the economics of those institutions. It has also isolated the public from one of the things that is most needed in a time of separation. That is the essential connection that comes from sharing arts experiences. The Columbus Symphony Orchestra appointed Denise Rehg as executive director in October of 2017. She hit the ground running with the accomplishment of several major goals in 2018 and 19, such as the upgrading of the administrative office space, a health care plan for the musicians, and ending both of those years out of a fiscal deficit. Denise has a long history of fundraising and arts management, serving as a leader in fundraising for several arts organizations and social impact groups. She's served on several arts and humanity boards and has been recognized for her work in arts, including the Arts Executive of the Year in 2016 by the Leadership Ohio and the U.S. Representative to Chile speaking on arts management in 2010. She's consulted with many arts organizations on a wide range of topics, including strategic planning, board development, volunteer management, and fundraising. Denise Rehg can be accurately described as a high-performing transitional leader. Denise, I want to welcome you to our program today. It's such a delight to have you here. We've known each other at some level over a number of years as you have done your work and been the face of the symphony, Columbus Symphony Orchestra. And it's good to have you here.
Well, thank you so much for asking me to do it, JR. Actually, we're quite excited to be able to share our view of how you persevere in both good times and bad.
Absolutely, isn't that it? And when we began to talk about our environment, the arts, you know, we all always have to sort of focus on a lot of things that may not always be at the top of people's minds. You know, there was a recent report that described the devastating impact that this pandemic that we're in has had on New York City's arts and entertainment sector. There's many of these venues, including Broadway theaters, remain shuttered now for nearly a year. The pandemic has had a profound effect on arts worldwide, not only theaters and Broadway, but across the country, across the world, have gone suddenly dark. Things like concerts for symphonies and contemporary music festivals have been canceled. Museums, galleries have been closed. Libraries and movie theaters were shuttered. This has had a devastating effect on the economics of these institutions, but it's also isolated the public from the one thing that I believe is most needed in this time of separation, and that is the essential connection that comes from sharing the art experience. Now, some arts organizations have done better than others inside of this, and the Columbus Symphony Orchestra is one of the betters, I guess, with some innovative thinking and aggressive programming to stay relevant in this time of crisis. There's no doubt that the pandemic was sort of the epitome of an unplanned event, and it came in quickly, came in without any warning. So I'm interested in how you think and how you remember this. What was your initial reaction to sort of the magnitude of this problem?
Well, the magnitude kept changing on all of us, which actually kept us continually on our toes and looking at the landscape week to week very differently than the prior week. So clearly, when it first started, I, like many other people, thought this would be a short-term thing. Never thought we would be sitting here a year later, still not able to hold things in the traditional way that we would do. So I think initially the first reaction was a bit of a shock. It's a bit of a shock that we'd gotten there and we were doing that. But I think we quickly at the symphony pivoted to what we were going to do about it. So the symphony became acutely aware early on that it's not about what you can't do. You'd better start examining what you can do. Not all arts organizations are the same. We're a nonprofit art producer. So that gives us some different capabilities. It gives us the capability of what kind of support do you have from the community, and it gives you the ability to rotate what you do because you're actually making the art. So initially it was shock, clearly moving immediately after the initial shock to what can we still do.
Absolutely, that idea of immediate action, I think, is a theme in this. We are prone to what we listen to, and there were no really definitive pieces of information that came out at the beginning of this, and it was sort of hard to know. You kind of had to make up your own mind and what you were going to do. But I hear two things in what you just said that are really essential. One is quick action. You decided to do something. And the second one that I heard, I like also, and that is you did not rely on an asymmetric approach. In other words, here's the problem, and this is the one thing that we can do. You said, here's the problem. What are the best solutions? We can do these different things, looking at this from different ways. How can we get to a solution that is going to be the best for us? And as part of this, the mission that you mentioned is presenting fine arts to the community is sort of that idea of connecting to the community at a number of different levels. Because although you're a provider of fine arts, a creator of art, that means a lot of different things in a lot of different places in the community. Yeah, indeed it does. And the symphony has always done a good job at, I would say, identifying what those different levels is, and trying to work the message inside of it. This idea of thinking about what you were going to do. If you can kind of bring back to your memory, what were some of the ideas? What were some of the thinking about your strategy? Your not only your presentation of art, but that experience, the sort of equity and ownership that audiences and tickets. you have to buy tickets, and all that stuff sort of disappeared. And so, go ahead.
But JR, truthfully, I told my counterparts in the symphony world in America that if you're the deer caught, don't be the deer caught in the headlight of the car. That deer gets run over. So we had no intentions of getting run over. And so the question became, Again, what could we do? But fortuitously, the symphony had just agreed in January of the year of COVID that we were going to adopt a new mission statement. And the new mission statement said that we were going to inspire and build a stronger community through music. So in a way, it provided us with a landscape to actually test that mission. And we saw it that way. We actually saw it as an opportunity to ask ourselves an all-important question, which is, how do we serve this community? And, symphonies historically have a huge history of we call it shining a light into the dark, right? You can look at the Leningrad Symphony, where bombs are dropping around them. They're literally starving. Many musicians have died of starvations. They go into their hall and they perform Shostakovich's Leningrad Symphony to a house full of people, and it made a difference. It goes down into the annals of just history and community building. So that was the question we asked ourselves. And so, to your point, there are many silos in which the symphony operates, education being a major one of them. So we actually started to pour a lot of energy into the development of our educational programs. And just to give you an example of the effects of that, 2 years ago, when we decided that we were going to try to double the number of children we served in 3 years, during COVID, we went from 23 2 years ago, not 3 years ago, to 23,000 to 64,000. So it, again, was us staying focused on what our mission and what our purpose was. And then every dark cloud has its layers of opportunities. And we just took advantage of those layers. We examined it. You were talking to me earlier about the education of leaders and educating leaders. One of the things I would say is that a leader of a smaller organization like the Symphony, what they need to do is to educate themselves on all parts of their organizations, because in the crisis, it is really pivotally important that we have all the pieces in our hands and understand what we can do with them. And if you don't have them all, you get stymied. Pull the leadership team together, get that mind, meld going on in the conference room with the board, with the leaders of the organization, and dig into what you can do.
Absolutely. And you really hit on a good point, the idea of the team. Now talk to me a little bit about your thinking, your leadership thinking on how you you utilize or manage is a hard word here. I don't want to use manage, but how you work with your team.
So we truly work as an extension of the vision, right? So every team member, so we have 5 of us are leaders of different departments. I'm of course the executive director, but every one of us play a really, really pivotal role in knowing the depth and the nuances of what our departments can do and can't do, from an operational perspective, what your opportunities really are. So we have a meeting every week. Every single week, the leadership team meets. Right now, because we're trying to build next year's budget, we're meeting once for the operational things currently going on, and we're meeting 2 hours a week to build next year's. Every week, we're meeting 2 hours plus the 1, with different purposes in mind, right? I think it's important that you focus in meetings, and so we don't want to mix this year with next year, except where it makes sense to do so. So again, constant communications, we discuss things. Seldom are decisions made by a single person, because no decision is worth its weight in water if you're not sure of the details that would be required of it for implementation. And the boss can't know that. The boss has got to trust its team to know the details of what can and can't be done.
Absolutely. And delegation is the key to that. I had a gentleman tell me this years ago, that you have to delegate until you're no longer needed. And yeah, really. I heard you talk about communication. One of the things that struck me inside of this is the way that the symphony communicated to the public. And I'm interested to sort of hearing your thinking around that, because I thought it was just plain innovative. It was like cutting edge stuff. And talk about that a little bit.
So, JR, earlier before we went online here, you and I had been talking about listening, about hearing. You have to listen to your patrons and to the community at large. So every time, so it was really critically important, obviously, for us to inform the community about what we were doing. So, you do what you can, but if you don't tell anybody you're doing it, it doesn't do a lot of good, right? So clearly we wanted to communicate what we were doing, but as much as we were communicating, we were listening. And so when we heard that, stakeholders, patrons, whatever, were asking questions. So one would call us and ask a question, and we would send out the information to everybody. So when we found out that the stakeholders even were asking, just an example, the stakeholders were asking for certain information and input about the community and what the arts community was doing and things, the symphony immediately went to task to writing a letter from the board chair and myself that was sent out to the 500 most influential people from our perspective where it relates to the community, where the stream goes on inside the leadership of the community, addressing the questions we had actually picked up in another boardroom. So I think that it's great to communicate, and we, of course, know what our normal streams of communications are. We have an email list of 40,000 individuals. We're going to stay with that group. But it is equally important that you don't assume that you know what all their questions are and what they need to hear. You have to listen to them, and you can almost certainly be guaranteed that if one person is asking a question, 25% of the 40,000 list is thinking it and just not saying it. So we just kept constantly responding in every way we could, proactively, and then also reactively to questions we received.
Yeah, that's really brilliant to be able to do that. There have been a lot of scholarly dissertations and a lot of writings around the idea of what some would call inclusive capitalism. Some would call it market impact. Some would call it social investing or social impact. The whole idea that you have a better idea of what your product needs to look like when you listen to what the market actually wants. And that's more than just market studies. It's about talking to people who are in that market. And it's just brilliant that you, in your leadership, understood that right at the beginning, because that's really is an essential piece of what has to happen. So communications, you did a good job. I could tell you stories of a number of my friends who sat around and watched the streaming concerts on Zoom, all in our own home, having our own wine and conversations. And
How you did that?
Yeah, it really was a good way to do it. As we see today, so the symphony is sort of the shining star here. Even though we're small, we're in a relatively small market. You see some pretty large organizations that just simply didn't do that. As we see these arts organizations, some are still struggling to stay alive after a year of the pandemic. And we, as we just talked about, and I'm saying we, because I am a fan and a season ticket holder. So I feel like you've done your job, because I feel equity in this process. Okay.
When people speak to us about the symphony in first person, our heart definitely goes pitter patter.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
And so observably, we've maintained a presence on the community stage, and it's worked, I think, quite well. Now, as the pandemic is starting to change now, we don't exactly know how it's kind of changed. Some people are already done their change, and so we're seeing the results of that in statistics. But let me hear your thinking a little bit about how you're going to sort of maintain this momentum. Some of the things that you've done during this pandemic, I actually hate to see go away.
Yeah, I love that you said that. So let me just address this question in two areas. So in one area, the symphony reacted very boldly to the pandemic. And why would we stop being bold now? Right? We were acting boldly when it was much more complicated. And again, we were listening to various segments. So while we were streaming for people like you, I've also seen you in the hall of late. We also were offering in-person attendance within the limits, allowed by the governor. So, but we also did a lot of things during COVID because of COVID that we will not stop doing. So one of the examples of that would be the community concert series. We did 20 community concerts in 9 days across Central Ohio. They were free. They were COVID compliant. Many of them, we still had to have them have tickets, even though they were free, because we had to limit the number of people. Many of them reached their maximum capacity, but we had a burning desire to get into some underserved communities where the ideal place for us to do that would have been the park system, and the city had shut down the parks. So this December, this August, we intend to do a week of free community concerts again. We will get into those underserved communities and bring a little bit of light and positivity with us. You're going to see that continue. I think that the relationship with the Columbus City Schools, where we're now part of the third grade curriculum, which we developed and worked with the city, Columbus City Schools, worked with them to get it embedded in the third grade curriculum. We intend to continue that. It's a free program, but it gets every third grader in the system touched. We will look to expand that. So we will do that. All those things, the good things that we can manage to hold on to, we're going to. We're going to most likely do holiday pops free for the whole community on on network TV. We will also do it in person. But we did that as a gift to the community during COVID. We put it on TV so that everybody with the TV could see it. But we really saw that as an opportunity, again, during a really, really critical period for all of us emotionally, for the symphony to provide a little bit of support. So that being said, going back to the boldness and how we're going to come out of this, we're going to do it the same way we developed the system when we were in it. We're going to be pretty darn bold about it. So we are actually planning on, we have set aside money to do one of the best Picnic with the Pops we've ever done. So that is going to happen in full force this summer. If we have to adjust according to the guidelines at that time, and we're not even deciding yet how we're going to do it, because it's going to change, and we've been around pivoting. We're going to wait for a little longer to see what kind of guidance we get, but we're going to do Picnic with the Pops, and it's not going to be a marginal Picnic with the Pops or reduced Picnic with the Pops. It's going to be one of the best ones we've ever done. And then we will open next year's season with a special Renee Fleming. So that will be the biggest ticketed item the symphony buys that year, but we're doing it in September for a reason. We're going to open the season with full optimism, positivity, and a sense of being there for the community. So you ask us what we're planning on doing. We're planning on being as bold as restrictions allow us to be.
That's great, and sort of we're kind of getting back to abnormal, but I think it's really a wise leadership choice to stay active in the community. One of the best ways I think that you can, the best marketing tool is exposure, and being there in front of audiences that may not even be aware of the symphony. Or would never go to the symphony. If you've seen it, or if you have access to hearing it, there's something, as I said at the beginning, there's something about the arts experience that is very very deep in sort of the human psychic. We drew pictures of our hands on cave walls, for goodness sake, and being out in the community, being out and giving those kinds of concerts, I think is a great strategy. that I'm going to guess will pay off a lot. I think it already has paid off because you have caught the attention of the community in this.
You know, JR, I really couldn't agree with you more. When we started down this road, the walls of the symphony offices echoed over and over again with the words, we have to be there. We have to be there for them. We have to be there for the community. And that's all members of the community, hence why we want so desperately to get into the underserved communities. But we know by the people who came to our concerts during, since October when we started doing them with limited capacity, that many people who'd never come to the symphony before were coming. So I'm going to tell you, 6 to 16 will be free in the Symphony Hall the entire 21-22 season.
Wow. So
what we're trying to do again is to look at the community and say, how do we serve it? You are absolutely right about the importance of the arts. We have all been traumatized. I mean, the truth of the matter is we have all been traumatized. So let's get families into the hall and let's let them enjoy togetherness and an uplifting sort of environment. Healing goes way, way beyond a vaccine. And we want to be part of that healing process. So we're doing an innumerable number of things to make sure that we remove the barriers for our children to the experience of what we do.
Yes, art is the method through which we define reality, isn't it?
Yes, it is indeed.
Yeah, exactly. And inside of this whole thing, we learn lessons. One of the things about that I can tell you for sure that I know is absolutely certain about this pandemic is that it will be not the last crisis that we'll ever face. It hasn't been the first, and it will not be the last. So, talk to me a little bit about your thinking on the lessons that you've learned and how that may change your thinking, your strategizing toward the next one that we don't even know about.
Well, we all had to figure it out. That is for sure. But figuring it out was really just about pulling together all the areas of strength you already had and knowing how to apply them to a solution, to a grand solution. So we had already, I know it seems like a minor thing, but it really isn't. The mandate created by our new mission statement provided a roadmap for us to then put everything on that road. So how do we do that in this situation on the road? So I think the most important thing that we do as nonprofits, now there's many arts organizations that are not nonprofits, but for those of us who are nonprofit, is that we keep the eye on the ball of our mission in service to the community, because that then tells you what you can construct and what you can do. So I don't think that it's kind of interesting that happened in such close proximity to the actual pandemic. And maybe had it happened further down and we had developed sort of how we were going to do that and things, that might have been harder to pivot to. But since we just did it in January, we hadn't really built the road yet. So we built it with COVID. But we've taken away so many learnings from that process that I don't doubt that they will be deployed and implemented in future. You never know what kind of catastrophe it's going to be. But if you stay focused on your mission and service to the community as a nonprofit, mm-hmm. you always sort of have your roadmap, put all your brain power into that, put all your leadership into that, get all the, consolidation of the team and a vision for the team becomes immeasurably important because it's exhausting work. And without a clear vision painted, I just think people wouldn't be able to stick to it. I mean, the symphony just has continued to work as probably harder than we did pre-pandemic because it's just been much more complicated to figure it out.
Absolutely. That's great. There's some really important items inside of that I'm hearing. This idea of you have to act from your strengths. You have to do that assessment as you began. What are we strong in? What are we weak in? How can we make the best of the resources that we have? A lot of groups, arts or non-arts, social impact or not social impact, have those same kinds of choices to make. And secondly, this idea of moving through your mission. One of the things crisis does is it excites your emotions to a point that you may forget to think. There's an old leadership axiom that goes, all behavior is driven by emotion, all emotion is driven by thought. And so inside of these kind of crises, what happens is we have a tendency to act out of our emotion instead of acting out of our thinking. And I am very much encouraged and impressed to hear that your leadership team went to the thinking first instead of the emotion first, you know. And then the other thing that I heard that I very much like is this idea that there is no perfect strategy. When you're beginning to plan for what's going to happen, there is not a perfect strategy. I had a good friend of mine, Mark Batonish, who is a Harvard professor at one point and Oxford, and in finance, who basically told me there is no perfect strategy. There's just a whole bunch of strategies that are good enough. and so,
and one doesn't work, you start thinking about the other ones. Okay, maybe this isn't the best one. Let's with the next, what we can do with the next one.
And I would also say, Denise, that your treatment of this, your approach to this whole thing, is a good example of a type of thinking that's called asymmetric. That asymmetric thinking says, like we talked earlier, what can we do? What can we do? Let's take one from column A, one from column B, and let's mix part of column C and D and do it this way. And then let's see if it works. And if it doesn't, there's the magic word, flexibility. You have to be able to change that as you move forward. Okay, I really think that this approach, the approach that you're telling me your story about, was pretty much exactly what should have been done inside of this. Because I can give you examples of other, not just arts organizations, but organizations who had a symmetric approach to this problem. And so you get things like major retail chains that are closing. Some restaurants have really expanded during this time because they thought one way. Some just plain went away. And so you're going to see that in arts organizations too. I see a lot of, and very interesting to me, and maybe you have thoughts on this, maybe you don't, the smaller the organization is, I guess the more flexible it is. And I see some large ones that are struggling, and I think will struggle for years to sort of come back from this.
JR, that kind of gets back to one of the points I was making earlier. So being smaller does make you more nimble, no doubt about it. But the other thing about being smaller is about this understanding that happens in a smaller group about all the columns, all the silos. There's so much cross-fertilization across those silos that a smaller organization can look at it in a full landscape, and they're not stopped by a silo wall, because they don't know what's inside that silo. And I think that is really, really critically important that the leader and the leadership team communicates in such a way that those silos exist in necessity from an operational perspective, but they don't have walls so that you can see into each other's space. Because I think that is the nimbleness and the flexibility that you get in a smaller group. The symphony, truthfully, is not all that small. But we have a very aggressive way of keeping those silo walls down. so that we can see what's going on across the landscape.
And would you agree that the essential piece of that strategy is leadership's ability to build a culture that fosters that?
I think so. I do, because, there's always that kind of sort of territory, proprietary kind of thing that happens inside silos. If you keep those walls down, in order to keep those walls down, you have to break down any feelings that individuals may have of that's my world. No, there is no that is my world. It is all the world of the company and our mission. And you have to just continually break down any sense of territorialism.
Yeah, that's people by nature want to be territorial, because of that idea of that fight or flight thing. We do as humans, but leadership's the big role of leadership is that you can build a culture that's outside of that, and I know. Many of your leaders, not many. I know some of your leaders. Don't know all of them.
Regular, JR.
Yeah, and they are interesting thinkers, because none of them say this is the way we're going to do it. My conversations with them has always been with them. Well, that we're gonna see how we handle that. Right? I think we're going to do this, or we might do this, whatever. And so that's a good indicator inside of your organization that people are beginning to think differently. And again, I point to the fact that it's really how you allow people the autonomy to think for themselves and to act for themselves. I don't mean to embarrass you, but I see you as a good leader here. Because what you do is you allow your people to have an autonomy that allows them to make their decisions, to get to the place where you want to be. We're always, as leaders, should be more focused on process rather than product, because if you can get the process to work, you'll have a better product. And so, Denise, thank you so much for taking the time here. This was so gracious of you. Do you have any final comments or anything you'd like to say before we bring this to a close?
No, JR. I really appreciate the opportunity to have done this, but I would just say that we should all keep our eye on the ball of what we're trying to accomplish as a community. The symphony sees itself as a bigger part of the community equation, and that's important for us too.
So we can do more together than we can apart.
Absolutely, always.
Well, that's great. Again, thank you, Denise, and I hope that you have seasons that see the Columbus Symphony Orchestra continue to be an essential part of not just the arts of the community, but the heart of the community.
Thank you for listening. If you would like more information on leadership in a changing world, look for J.R. Klein's Oxford University Press published books on global business wherever books are sold. JR Global is actively working with companies and people looking to grow while becoming more socially responsible. J.R. Klein is available for conversations about socially responsible business and inclusive capitalism. If you are interested in contacting us, call JR Global on 01 614 526 9118.